The girl walked into Rosie's diner at 11:47 p.m., carrying nothing but a black duffel bag and the kind of eyes that had already seen too much. Outside, Pinewood, Oregon was the quietest it ever got. Cold October wind pushing dead leaves across an empty two-lane road, the mountain pressing down on the town like a held breath. Nobody paid attention to a girl like that in a place like this. Nobody except Callum Wren, 17, invisible, wiping the same counter he'd wiped 1,000 nights before. He noticed the way she sat with her back to the wall. He noticed the way she watched the door. He noticed the black SUV that pulled into the lot 40 minutes later and didn't turn off its engine. Before this story goes any further, if you've ever felt invisible in a town that forgot your name, this one's for you. Subscribe to the channel and follow every part to the end, because what happens next in Pinewood will shake you. Hit like and drop a comment telling me your city, your country, wherever you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to that diner. The graveyard shift at Rosie's diner was exactly what it sounded like. Callum Wren had worked it for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. And in all that time, he had learned one thing with the certainty of a man twice his age. The world between midnight and 5 in the morning was a different country. Different rules, different silences. People who came in at that hour came in carrying things they couldn't put down anywhere else. The divorced trucker with his 3rd coffee and his 4th regret. The night shift nurse who stared at the wall and didn't touch her pie. The teenagers who thought darkness made them brave. Callum didn't judge any of them. He just refilled their cups and kept the counter clean and stayed out of their way, which was the same thing he did everywhere else in his life. Staying out of the way was the one skill Callum Wren had mastered completely. He was tall enough to be noticed and quiet enough to be forgotten, which was the worst kind of combination for a 17-year-old boy in a mountain town where football players became legends and everyone else became furniture. His mother worked double shifts at the lumberyard office and came home too tired to talk. His father had left when Callum was 9, and the only thing he'd taken with him was the excuse Callum's mother used every time someone asked why her son didn't smile right. Callum didn't blame her. He'd stopped blaming anyone for anything around the time he turned 15 and realized that blame was just another word for hope. And hope was a currency that didn't spend well in Pinewood. The diner itself smelled like burnt coffee and industrial grease and something sweeter underneath. The ghost of whatever Rosie herself had baked 50 years ago before her granddaughter took over and switched everything to frozen. The booths were cracked red vinyl. The jukebox in the corner hadn't worked in 3 years, but nobody had moved it because Pinewood didn't throw things away. It just let them get older in place. The fluorescent light above the register flickered every 40 seconds with the reliability of a sick heartbeat, and Callum had stopped noticing it the same way you stopped noticing a scar. He was thinking about the calculus test he hadn't studied for when the door opened and the girl walked in. She was maybe 17, maybe 19, the kind of age that exhaustion made hard to read. Dark hair pulled back in a way that looked like it had been neat 12 hours ago. A canvas jacket 2 sizes too big, the collar pulled up against the cold. She was carrying the black duffel bag the way a person carries something they refuse to put on the floor, the strap double wrapped around one hand, the bag pressed against her hip. She didn't look around when she came in the way normal people do. She moved to the corner booth, the one with sight lines to both the door and the window, and sat with her back to the wall before she'd even taken off her jacket. Callum had seen scared people before. This was different. Scared people looked at the door because they were worried about what might come through it. This girl looked at the door like she was already planning what to do when it did. He picked up his notepad and walked over, and up close she looked like she hadn't slept in at least 2 days. There was a bruise along her jaw that she'd tried to cover with something and hadn't quite managed. Her hands were steady, though. That was the thing Callum noticed. Her hands were completely, unnaturally still, resting flat on the table, and that kind of stillness wasn't calm. It was control. The kind of control that took everything a person had to maintain. "What can I get you?" he said. Not unfriendly, just honest. She looked at him for a moment like she was running a calculation. "Coffee, whatever's hot, and can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Is there a back door?" Callum looked at her. She held his gaze without flinching, and he understood then, with the particular clarity that sometimes comes at midnight in empty diners, That whatever this girl was running from was not the kind of thing you asked about, and she was not the kind of person who would tell you anyway. "Through the kitchen," he said. "Left past the fryer, right at the freezer, leads to the alley." Something in her face shifted. Not relief exactly, more like the small recalibration a person makes when they find one solid thing in a room full of uncertain ones. "Thank you." He brought her coffee. She wrapped both hands around the mug the way people do when they are cold all the way through, not just on the surface, and she stared at the window that looked out onto the parking lot and Route 9 beyond it, and Calwood went back behind the counter and tried not to watch her. He watched her anyway. That was the honest truth. There was one other customer, Pete Danforth, retired, who came in every Tuesday and Thursday night ostensibly for decaf, but really because his house was too quiet since his wife passed, and who had never once in 11 months acknowledged Callum's existence beyond a nod at the coffee. The cook, a heavy-set man named Grover, who communicated primarily in grunts, and who Callum was reasonably certain had not left the building in 6 days, was somewhere in the back doing whatever Grover did between 2 and 5 a.m. That was it. The whole world contained in one fluorescent-lit room at the edge of a mountain town that the rest of Oregon had mostly stopped thinking about. Callum was refilling Pete's decaf, the old man asleep in his booth, which happened sometimes, and which Callum had long ago decided to treat as nobody's business, when he saw the headlights. A black SUV, full size. Oregon plates that were too clean for a vehicle that size in that kind of weather. It pulled into the lot and stopped near the door and didn't turn off the engine. The exhaust plume rose in the cold air like something breathing. Callum watched it. Nobody got out. He set the coffee pot down and glanced at the corner booth. The girl was already looking at the window, her body perfectly still, her coffee untouched. She had seen it too. Of course she had. She'd been watching that window since the moment she sat down. He looked back at the SUV. Still no movement, just the engine running and the white exhaust and the headlights burning in the October dark. 3 minutes passed. They felt like 20. Then the SUV's passenger door opened and a man got out. Big. Not Jim big, but the kind of big that comes from a lifetime of physical work and not being particularly worried about getting hurt. He had a jacket that was too light for the weather, but cut in a way that suggested he was carrying something underneath it he wanted access to quickly. He stood beside the vehicle and looked at the diner with the specific blankness of a professional assessing a problem. A second man got out of the driver's side. Shorter, but with the same measured movement, the same quality of controlled attention. They walked toward the door. Callum's heart was doing something unfortunate in his chest. He picked up a dish rag, the single most useless object in a situation like this, and held it because his hands needed something to do. He thought about Grover in the back. He thought about Pete asleep in his booth. He thought about the girl in the corner with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug she hadn't drunk. The two men came in. The taller one looked at Pete, dismissed him, looked at Callum, dismissed him. Then found the corner booth and something changed in his face. Not cruelty exactly, more like relief. The particular relief of a person who has been looking for something and has finally located it. "Marin," he said. Just that. Like a door closing. The girl didn't move. "I'm not going with you." That's not really the conversation we're having. Callum was standing 6 feet from this exchange, holding a dirty dish rag, and everything in him that had spent 17 years learning to be invisible was screaming at him to stay that way. "Go in the back. Let Grover handle it. This is not your problem. You don't know this girl. You don't know what she's carrying. You don't know what those men are willing to do in a diner on a Tuesday night in Pinewood." The shorter man moved to the left, positioning himself between the girl and the back of the diner, cutting off the kitchen, the back door, the exit Callum had just told her about. Something went cold and very clear in Callum's chest. It was not bravery exactly. He would have described it differently if anyone had ever asked him. Something more like the simple, terrible recognition that there are moments where you are the only obstacle between a person and something you cannot allow to happen. And in those moments, the question of what you want to do becomes irrelevant. "She's a customer," Callum said. The tall man looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, the way you look at something that wasn't supposed to speak. "Go in the back, kid." "She's a customer," Callum said again. and you don't have a reservation." It was a ridiculous thing to say. He knew it was ridiculous while he was saying it, but the girl in the corner made the smallest sound, half breath, half something he couldn't name, and it was enough. The tall man crossed the space between them in 2 strides and grabbed Callum by the front of his shirt. Up close he smelled like cigarettes and the particular chemical sharpness of men who lived in climate-controlled vehicles. And his grip was the kind that communicated instantly and without performance that this was not a man who issued second warnings. "Last time," he said, his voice low and very calm. "Go. In. The back." "No," Callum said. What happened next happened fast. Later he would only be able to reconstruct it in fragments, the way you reconstruct a car accident. The man's arm moving, Callum's body going into the counter, the edge catching him across the lower ribs in a way that drove the air out of him completely. Pete Danforth waking up and making a sound. The shorter man moving toward the corner booth. The girl coming off the seat with the duffel bag. Not running, not panicking, something harder than either. And then her voice, cutting through everything. "Don't touch him again." The tall man turned from Callum, who was folded against the counter trying to remember how breathing worked, and looked at the girl. "You don't give orders." "I just called someone," she said. Her voice was flat, certain. She held up a phone in one hand, the duffel bag clutched against her chest with the other. "They know where I am. They're already coming. And the people coming for me? They're not going to send 2. The tall man stared at her. Something shifted in the room. "Whatever you think you know about me," she continued, "and whatever you think is in this bag, nothing you've been told about it is accurate. So before you make a decision tonight that you cannot take back, I would think very carefully about who gave you your orders and why." A silence stretched out like a wire. The shorter man looked at the tall man. The tall man's jaw worked. Pete Danforth was frozen in his booth, staring with the expression of a man who had come in for decaf and ended up somewhere else entirely. The tall man looked at Callum, crumpled against the counter. Something passed through his face that Callum couldn't fully read. Reassessment, maybe. Calculation. Then he looked back at the girl. "You have 6 hours," he said. "Then it doesn't matter who you called." He walked out. The shorter man followed. The door closed. The SUV sat in the lot for exactly 45 seconds. Callum counted without deciding to. And then backed out onto Route 9 and its lights disappeared into the dark. The diner breathed. Pete Danforth put his face in his hands. Grover came out of the kitchen, looked at Callum against the counter, looked at the girl, looked at the door and said, "I'm calling the sheriff." "Don't," Callum said, still holding his ribs. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Grover stared at him. "Boy, what in the—" She said, "Don't call anyone." Callum looked at the girl. "Right?" She was already looking at him, and for the first time since she'd walked in, the control in her face fractured just slightly, just enough to show what was underneath it, which was not fear, not exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that looked like the particular despair of a person who has been alone with something too heavy for too long. "You don't know what you just did," she said. "I know what they were going to do," Callum said. "That's not the same thing." He pushed himself off the counter. His ribs screamed at him. He walked to the coffee station, poured 2 fresh mugs, walked back, and set one in front of her without being asked. "You said 6 hours," he said. "They said 6 hours. So you have time to drink that." She stared at him. He had no idea what she was looking for. After a moment, she picked up the mug, and Callum sat down across from her in the corner booth, which was something he had never done with any customer in 11 months of graveyard shifts, and which felt completely and totally correct. "My name's Callum," he said. A pause. Long enough that he thought she wasn't going to answer. Then, "Marin." Outside, the wind picked up off the mountain and threw a handful of dead leaves against the window, and Route 9 stretched empty in both directions, and Pinewood, Oregon, was as quiet as it ever got. Callum had no idea that in 4 hours, that silence would be replaced by the sound of 200 Harley-Davidson engines descending from the mountain pass. He had no idea that the black duffel bag pressed against Marin Hartley's ribs contained evidence that could bring down half the law enforcement apparatus in 3 Oregon counties. He had no idea who her father was. He had no idea that the two men who just walked out of Rosie's diner had already made a phone call, and that the phone call had set something in motion that a girl's warning and a boy's cheap courage could not stop. Outside, somewhere up on Route 9, where the mountain road curved past the tree line, there was a sound. Very faint. The kind of sound you felt in your sternum before your ears registered it. The kind of sound that, if you'd grown up anywhere near the western roads, you would recognize in your sleep. Engines. Not one, not 10. Something much larger, much darker, moving down from the mountains like a thunderhead made of steel and leather and 60 years of accumulated fury. Callum felt it before he heard it. He looked at Marin. Marin was already looking out the window, and something in her face had changed. Something old and complicated and heavy that he didn't have a name for yet. "You called your father," Callum said. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The windows of Rosie's diner began to vibrate. The windows stopped vibrating and started shaking. Not the subtle tremor of a heavy truck on Route 9. Not the rattle that came when the logging convoys moved through at 4 in the morning. This was something else. This was the kind of frequency that got into the fillings of your teeth and the base of your spine and reminded every animal part of your brain that something large and organized and completely committed was moving in your direction. Pete Danforth was on his feet. He'd been a solid man once, 20 years in the lumber trade, arms like bridge cable. But standing in the cracked vinyl booth at 2 in the morning, staring at a window that wouldn't stop vibrating, he looked like what he was. An old man alone at the edge of the world who had come in for decaf and found something else entirely. "What is that?" he said. Not a question, more like a man talking to himself to make sure his voice still worked. Grover had come all the way out of the kitchen now, his apron greasy and his expression stripped of everything except raw, animal alertness. He was holding a spatula. Callum would think about that later. Grover standing in the doorway of Rosie's diner at 2 in the morning holding a spatula like it meant something, and find it both completely absurd and somehow the most human thing he'd ever seen. Marin hadn't moved. She sat with both hands around the coffee mug, looking out the window, and her face had gone somewhere private and unreachable. Whatever was coming down that mountain road, whatever the sound in the distance meant, she had known it was coming. She had made it happen. And whatever she felt about that was too complicated for Callum to read from across a table. He looked at her. "How many?" She didn't look at him. "I don't know." "Estimate." A pause. "A lot." That was not particularly helpful, but before he could press further, the first headlight crested the ridge above town, and then another, and they kept coming, a river of white light pouring down the mountain switchbacks. And now the sound had resolved from abstract vibration into something specific and unmistakable. The collective thunder of Harley-Davidson engines running in close formation, each one distinct and yet folded into the whole. The way individual instruments disappear into an orchestra, except this orchestra was made of steel and exhaust, and 100 years of American road. Pete Danforth sat back down. Very slowly, like his legs had made the decision for him. The first bikes reached Pinewood's main drag, 4 blocks of storefronts that rolled up at 9 p.m. and opened at 7 a.m., and had been doing so since 1962, and began to fill the street. Not racing, not loud for the sake of loud. They came in with the measured, deliberate pace of men who knew exactly where they were going and were not in any hurry because they had already decided what happened when they got there. 2 by 2, then 4 by 4, the formation spreading to fill the road, headlights sweeping across darkened storefronts, and the empty parking lot of the hardware store, and the dead marquee of the Pinewood Cinema that had closed 3 years ago. Callum watched through the window. He counted. He stopped counting at 40, and they were still coming. The lead bike pulled into Rosie's parking lot and stopped. A big man on a big Road King, leather cut across his shoulders with a back patch Callum couldn't read from this distance. He didn't get off the bike. He just sat there with the engine running and looked at the diner with the patient, measuring attention of a man who had learned patience the hard way and charged interest for every second of it. More bikes filled the lot, then the street in front of the diner, then the side street. They spread with an organizational precision that suggested this was not the first time these men had moved into a small town and secured a perimeter, and that understanding landed in Callum's chest with a cold, specific weight. The lead biker cut his engine. One by one, like dominoes falling in reverse, the other engines died. Starting from the perimeter and moving inward until the last engine cut and Pinewood was silent in a way it had never been silent before, not the ordinary silence of a mountain town at 2 a.m., but the weighted, compressed silence of 200 men choosing not to speak. That silence was louder than the engines had been. The lead biker got off his bike. He was in his late 50s, maybe 60, with the kind of physical presence that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with the particular gravity that accumulates in a man who has made decisions that mattered for long enough. Iron gray hair, pulled back. A jaw that looked like it had been broken and healed wrong at least once. He walked toward the diner door with the unhurried stride of a man who had never in his adult life needed to hurry because the things he was walking toward invariably waited. He pushed the door open. The bell above the door chimed. That small, ridiculous domestic sound. The same bell that chimed when the Rotary Club came in for pie on Friday mornings. The same bell that had been chiming in this diner for 30 years. And here it was chiming for this. The man stepped inside. He looked at Pete. He looked at Grover. He looked at Callum. Then he found Marin in the corner booth, and everything in his face changed in a way that lasted exactly 1 second before he locked it back down. But Callum caught it. It was what a father's face does when he has been afraid for his child and can see that the child is still breathing. "Marin," he said. "Dad." Her voice was flat, contained, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment and decided tone was the only thing they could control. Silas Hartley walked to the counter and put both hands flat on it and looked at his daughter the way a man looks at something he thought he'd lost. The back patch on his cut said Steel Angels. Below it, in smaller letters, President. "You should have called sooner," he said. "I know." "How long were you running?" 4 days. Something moved through his jaw. 4 days. He said it the way you say a number when the number means something other than what it says. "You were running for 4 days and you called me at 2 in the morning from a diner. I handled it." "Marin, there were 2 of them. They left." She paused. Callum stopped them. Silas turned and looked at Callum. Really looked at him. The way the man in the SUV had looked at him earlier, but entirely different. Less like assessment, more like trying to read a text in a language he hadn't spoken in a while. Callum met his eyes. He didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. Something in him that had already taken 1 hit tonight and decided that flinching wasn't available anymore. "You the one working the counter," Silas said. "Yes, sir." "How old are you?" 17. Silas looked at him for another moment. Then he turned back to Marin. "Show me the bag." Marin's hands tightened on the duffel strap. "Not here." "Marin." "Not here, Dad. Not in front of—" She stopped, looked at Callum. Something crossed her face. "We need somewhere private." Silas looked around the diner with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd had to make quick decisions about spaces for a long time. He looked at Grover. "You got a back room." Grover stared at him. "Sir, I think you should know this is a storage room," Silas said patiently. "Or an office, somewhere that isn't this. The manager's office, in the back." Grover pointed with the spatula. Silas nodded. He looked at Callum. "You, come." It was not a request. It was also not unkind. It was the voice of a man who had spent 40 years being obeyed and had lost the ability to tell the difference between a request and a command without noticing. Callum looked at his ribs. He looked at the girl. He looked at the door, through which he could see the silhouettes of what appeared to be the entire adult male population of a small country standing very still in a parking lot. He put down the dish rag and followed. The manager's office at Rosie's Diner was a charitable description of a room that contained a metal desk, a folding chair, a filing cabinet from the Ford administration, and approximately 40 years of accumulated paper that had avalanched off the desk and surrendered to the floor. A single bare bulb overhead. Silas stood. Marin sat on the edge of the desk. Callum took the folding chair because no one told him to, and no one told him not to. Marin set the duffel bag on the desk and opened it. Callum had been expecting. He didn't know what he'd been expecting. Cash, maybe. Drugs, the way every crime story ended up there eventually. Something that looked like what it was. What came out of the duffel bag was a laptop, a hard drive sealed in a waterproof case, 3 thick manila folders rubber-banded shut, and a burner phone still in its packaging. Silas looked at the contents without touching them. His face had gone still in a specific, careful way. "Where did you get this?" he said. "Marcus gave it to me." A silence. "Marcus is dead," Silas said. "I know." Marin's voice didn't change. "He gave it to me 3 days before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I needed to keep it away from the club until I knew who I could trust." Silas raised his eyes from the desk and looked at his daughter. "He said away from the club." "Yes." "Meaning he thought someone in the club—" "I don't know what he thought, Dad. He's dead." For the first time, something cracked in Marin's voice. Just a hairline fracture, there and gone in half a second. But Callum felt it like a change in air pressure. "He gave it to me, and 3 days later he was gone, and I've been running ever since because I don't know who to trust. And I don't know who's watching, and I don't know if the men Blackwell sent tonight were going to take me, or take the bag, or both." Blackwell. The name landed in the room and stayed there. Callum filed it without understanding it. Silas put one hand over his mouth and stood like that for a moment, looking at the evidence on the desk. When he took his hand away, his expression was the flattest Callum had seen it. "How much is on the drive?" "I don't know. I haven't looked." "Why not?" "Because Marcus said not to. He said the person who looks at it becomes the person who has to carry it." Marin looked at the drive. "I've been carrying it for 4 days without looking at it, and I don't know if that makes me smart or stupid." "Smart," Silas said. Then quieter. "Marcus always was smarter than I gave him credit for." He reached out and picked up one of the manila folders, held it without opening it, set it back down. In that small sequence of movements, Callum saw something he hadn't expected to see in this man. Hesitation. The specific hesitation of a person who is not afraid of what they'll find, but is afraid of what they'll have to do about it. "The 2 men tonight," Silas said, looking at Callum again. "Describe them." Callum described them. Silas listened without expression. When Callum finished, Silas looked at the middle distance for a moment, then said, "Local plates?" "Oregon. Too clean." Silas glanced at him sideways. "You noticed that." "I noticed things," Callum said. He wasn't sure why he said it. It sounded defensive, and he hadn't meant it that way. Something shifted in Silas's expression, not warmth exactly, more like a door opening an inch. "The taller one. Left or right hand on the jacket?" Callum thought back. The man grabbing him. Which arm had moved first? "Left. He kept his right hand free. Blackwell's security runs left dominant. He hires former military, washed out for psych evals." Silas looked at his daughter. "They weren't trying to grab you. They were trying to grab the bag." Marin went still. "You're sure? If they wanted you, they'd have sent more." A silence settled over the room that was different from the ones before it. This one had weight and shape. Callum sat in the folding chair and felt it pressing on him, and understood that whatever conversation was happening in this room was above his comprehension level in about 11 different ways, and that he was here because Marin had said his name and Silas had said come, and both of those things had happened in the span of about 40 seconds, and he had not thought once about whether he wanted to be here. He wasn't sure he did want to be here. He was also not sure he had the option of leaving. "I need to talk to my men," Silas said. He looked at the evidence on the desk. "Nobody touches this. Nobody opens it." He looked at Callum. "You stay here." "With her?" Callum said. "With her." He moved toward the door, then stopped, half-turned. "The taller man. Did he hurt you?" "Caught me on the counter," Callum said. "Ribs. I'm fine." Silas looked at him for a moment that lasted slightly longer than it needed to. "All right." He went out. Marin and Callum sat in the manager's office of Rosie's Diner at 2:30 in the morning, surrounded by evidence that belonged to a dead man, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "Marcus," Callum said finally. "Who was he?" Marin pulled her knees up onto the desk. made herself smaller in a way that was so automatic he suspected she didn't know she was doing it. Road captain, Steel Angels, 15 years. My dad trusted him completely. She paused. Everyone did. What happened to him? Car accident. Her voice made the phrase into something else. Two words that meant one thing when they should have meant another. 3 weeks ago, took a curve too fast on Route 18, no guardrail. She was looking at the waterproof case that held the hard drive. Marcus Velez did not take curves too fast. He rode that road every week for 15 years. Callum let that sit. Outside, he could hear faintly the low murmur of voices from the parking lot. 200 men talking in the particular undertone of a group that has learned to have serious conversations in public spaces. Occasionally a boot on asphalt, the faint creak of leather. What's Blackwell, he said. Desmond Blackwell, real estate developer out of Portland. Development, construction, land acquisition. She paused. That's the legal part. And the other part? She looked at him. She was still doing that thing where she seemed to be running a calculation, deciding how much to give and what to hold back. And Callum had learned enough in the last hour to understand that this was not manipulation. It was survival architecture. The girl had spent 4 days alone with a bag she couldn't open and men she couldn't identify behind her. And the habit of measuring every disclosure had probably kept her alive. The other part, she said carefully, is that Blackwell is connected to every major infrastructure contract in Western Oregon for the last 10 years. Roads, utilities, water systems, and the reason he's gotten every single one of those contracts has nothing to do with competitive bidding. Who did he pay? Callum said. Marin was quiet. The bag, Callum said. That's what's on the drive. Who he paid? Marcus thought so. I think so. She touched the waterproof case without opening it. If Marcus documented what he said he documented, it's not just corrupt officials, Callum. It's law enforcement, county level, possibly state. She looked at him directly. One of the men on that list might be the person who signs the report on Marcus's accident. The folding chair felt like it might give way under Callum. He pressed his feet flat on the floor and breathed through his nose. Okay, he said. Okay, she repeated, like the word confused her. I mean, okay, I'm still here. I'm not... He stopped, started again. I'm not going anywhere. She studied him. You don't know what that means? You keep saying that. Because it's true. Maybe. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His ribs ached with each breath. But you called your father. And your father came with 200 bikers. So now whatever this is, it's not you alone with a bag anymore. It's that. He nodded toward the front of the building, the parking lot, the organized silence outside. And I was the one who bought you time to make that call. So yeah, I don't know exactly what that means, but I know I'm part of it now, whether I walked into it or not. A silence. Then, very quietly, I didn't thank you. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Something shifted in her expression. I'm doing it anyway. Those men... She stopped. They weren't going to hurt me. Not physically. They were going to take the bag and make me watch them destroy what Marcus died for. And then I'd have no way to prove it and no one to tell it to, and... She stopped again, pressed her lips together. You stood up. Yeah. You got hurt. Yeah. Why? Callum thought about it. The honest answer was that he wasn't entirely sure, that something had moved in him that was faster than reasoning, and he'd acted before the reasoning could catch up and tell him not to. But that wasn't a good enough answer, probably. Because you were alone, he said. And they weren't. Marin looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked away, which was probably better for both of them. The door opened and Silas came back in. He had a man with him, younger, mid-30s, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the particular stillness of someone who had been trained to be still professionally. He wore his Steel Angels cut, without the weight most men carry in unfamiliar rooms, which meant he was either very confident or very dangerous, and the way his eyes moved when he entered the room suggested it was both. This is Decker, Silas said. Road sergeant. I trust him. Marin looked at Decker. Something passed between them. Recognition, history, the shorthand of people who have known each other a long time under difficult circumstances. Decker, she said. Marin. He looked at the desk, at the evidence, back at her. Marcus. Yeah. Decker nodded once, slowly, the nod of a man absorbing news he'd been afraid of. He told me he was looking into something, wouldn't say what, said it was better I didn't know. He looked at the folders. I thought he was being dramatic. He wasn't, Marin said. No. Decker pulled out the chair from behind the desk, turned it around, sat on it backwards. Okay, tell me everything from the beginning. Marin told it. She told it efficiently and without performance, the way someone tells a story they've been going over in their own head for days, looking for holes in it. Callum listened and filed pieces. 4 days ago, a gas station outside Salem where she'd seen the same truck twice. 3 days ago, a motel in Eugene where someone had moved her bag while she was in the shower. 2 days ago, a call from a number she didn't recognize that only said one sentence before the line went dead. They already know about the drive. When she finished, the room was quiet. Decker looked at the folders. We need to know what's on the drive. Marcus said, I know what Marcus said. His voice wasn't harsh, but it was certain. Marcus is dead, Marin. Whatever protocol he set up doesn't account for 200 men sitting in a parking lot in a mountain town at 3 a.m. with no intelligence and no plan. Silas looked at his daughter, waiting. Marin looked at the waterproof case. Her jaw worked. Callum could see the war going on behind her eyes. Marcus's voice against the present moment, the dead man's instructions against the living men who needed answers. Open it, she said finally. Decker reached for the case. Silas put a hand on his arm. Not us. Decker looked at him. Silas, if there are names on that drive and we're the first ones to see them, every lawyer Blackwell has will argue we fabricated it. He looked at his daughter. It needs to be opened by someone who has no stake in what's on it. The room went quiet. And then, by the particular gravitational logic of bad nights in small rooms, every person in that office looked at Callum. Callum looked back at them. I'm 17, he said. I'm a dishwasher. You're also the only person in this room with no connection to the Steel Angels, no record, no reason to be part of this, Silas said. His voice was not unkind. It was the voice of a man stating a geometry. You open the drive. You tell us what's on it. Whatever's there, you're the witness. I don't... Oh. Callum stopped, looked at Marin. She was watching him with the same careful, calculating attention she'd had since she walked in, except that underneath it now there was something else. Something that looked like the specific, painful hope of a person who has run out of alternatives. He thought about Marcus Velez taking a curve too fast on a road he'd driven for 15 years. He pulled his chair up to the desk. Decker unsealed the waterproof case and handed Callum the drive. Callum plugged it into the laptop. The screen came up. A single folder. Inside it, a document structure that went 6 levels deep, each subfolder labeled with a date and a set of initials. He opened the top level. Spreadsheets, scanned documents, audio files, transaction records running back 9 years. And at the top of the file, pinned, a document labeled Contact List. Callum opened it. He read the names. He read them twice. When he looked up, his face had told them everything before he said a word. Talk, Silas said. The third name on this list, Callum said. His voice came out surprisingly steady for a boy who felt like the room had tilted. Detective Carl Whitford, Pinewood Sheriff's Department. He looked at Silas. He's the one who signed Marcus Velez's accident report. The silence in the room was the kind that follows a door being closed from the outside. Decker's chair scraped back. He stood up. If Whitford is on Blackwell's list, he knows we're here. He knew the minute Marin called in her location. Silas looked at his daughter. Did you call from your regular phone? Marin had gone very still. I called from the diner phone, she said, but I told you my location before that. When I first called, I used my cell. Which Whitford could have flagged, Decker said. Which Whitford could have already passed to Blackwell, Silas said. All three of them looked at Callum as if he might have an answer. He didn't. But something Decker had said was pulling at the back of his mind, an itch he couldn't locate. He knew the minute Marin called in her location, not from a cell phone flag. Before that. The two men tonight, Callum said slowly. They were already in the parking lot when she got here, before she made any call, before she used the diner phone. Decker looked at him. She came in at 11:47, Callum said. The SUV pulled in at 12:28. That's 40 minutes. Not enough time to flag a cell, run a location, scramble two men from Portland, and have them here. He looked at the contact list on the screen. The third name. So either someone already knew she was heading toward Pinewood before tonight, or someone told them where she was going, Silas said. The room absorbed that. Someone who knew her route, Decker said, very carefully. Someone who knew she'd run toward familiar ground. Silas looked at his daughter. Did you tell anyone you were coming here? Anyone at all? Marin's face was doing something complicated and controlled and terrible. No, she said. A pause. I didn't tell anyone, she said again. But I called Marcus's phone 2 days ago. I don't know why. I needed to hear his voicemail. I needed to hear him talk. Her voice stayed flat, but her eyes were working hard. Someone answered. The room went so quiet Callum could hear his own pulse. Someone answered Marcus's phone, Silas said. They didn't say anything. Neither did I. I hung up. She looked at the drive, at the contact list still open on the screen. But they had long enough to trace the call, and they had Marcus's phone, which means they had his contacts, which means they know that Marcus and I were... She stopped. Close, Decker said, quietly. Yeah, Marin said. Close. Silas was looking at the contact list. At the third name, his expression had gone somewhere sealed and airless. Marcus's phone, he said. Who took it from the accident scene? Nobody answered that. Nobody needed to. Outside in the parking lot, 200 men were sitting in the cold dark waiting for orders. And somewhere in Pinewood, possibly very close, possibly watching the light in the manager's office window from somewhere on Route 9, a man whose name was on a dead man's evidence list was already making his next call, and the call he was making was not to law enforcement, and the people on the other end of it were not going to wait 6 hours like the first two had. The laptop screen threw blue light across Callum's face, and he sat very still in the folding chair, 17 years old, his ribs broken and his hands steady. And he thought, I stood up in a diner because a girl was alone. And now he was sitting in a room with a dead man's evidence and a biker president and the knowledge that the detective who would normally be the person you called when something like this happened was the person you could not call. And the men who were coming were not going to stop at a warning this time. And there was no version of this where he walked back out through the diner, picked up his dish rag, and was invisible again. That version of Callum Wren, the boy who stayed out of the way, had walked out of this story sometime around 12:28 when a black SUV pulled into a parking lot and didn't turn off its engine. He just hadn't known it yet. He knew it now. The decision made itself. That was how it felt to Callum afterward. Not like choosing, but like watching a choice that had already been made reveal itself in the sequence of what happened next. The way a road becomes visible only when your headlights find it, the road having always been there. Silas looked at Decker. One look, the kind that carried a full conversation. Decker moved to the door, opened it, said something in a low voice to someone outside. Callum heard boots on tile, 2 sets, 3. And then the murmur of the diner's front room reorganizing itself around new instructions. We're moving, Silas said. He began packing the evidence back into the duffel bag with the careful, methodical efficiency of a man who had learned that what you did in the first 30 seconds after a situation changed was what determined whether you survived the next hour. Laptop, drive, folders. He sealed the waterproof case himself, pressing the gasket closed with his thumbs. Callum. Yeah. Is there anyone who needs to know where you are tonight? Callum thought of his mother. Double shift at the yard, home by 6, asleep by 6:15. He was scheduled to close the diner at 5 and be gone before she woke. She would not check on him. That was not a criticism. It was just the mathematics of a woman who worked 60 hours a week and trusted her son to handle the hours she couldn't account for. No, he said. Silas nodded. Then you're with us until this is done. It was not framed as a question. Callum noticed that and filed it alongside everything else he was filing, the growing stack of things he didn't fully understand but was choosing to carry anyway. Marin had the bag. She stood with it the way she'd stood with it when she first walked into the diner, strap double wrapped around her hand, bag against her hip, but something had changed in her posture, less the tension of a person running and more the set of a person who has stopped running and is figuring out what comes next. The shift was small. Callum noticed it the way he noticed things, quietly and without making a production of it. They went out through the kitchen. Grover was standing by the fryer with his arms crossed and his spatula gone, and the expression of a man who has decided that whatever is happening is categorically above his pay grade, and he is going to stand exactly where he is and not engage with any of it. Callum met his eyes as he passed. "I'll be back for the closing shift," Callum said. Grover stared at him. "Boy?" "I know. I'm calling your mother." "She's asleep. Don't wake her up, Grover." He pushed through the back door. The alley behind Rosie's smelled like dumpster and cold rain and the particular mineral sharpness of Oregon mountain air at 3 in the morning. The rain had started at some point in the last hour. Not heavy, just the fine persistent mist that Western Oregon did better than anywhere Callum had ever been, which was nowhere, but he'd read about it. It put a slick sheen on everything, turned the asphalt black and reflective, made the neon from the diner sign bleed red across the puddles. 3 steel angels were waiting in the alley. They'd come around the building without being visible from the front, which told Callum something about how this group moved, not as a mob, but as a structure, each part doing its specific function without being told twice. One of the 3 was very young, early 20s, with a prospect patch, and the kind of vigilant alertness that had not yet learned to be quiet about itself. The other 2 were older, mid-40s, with the particular stillness that Callum was starting to recognize as the Steel Angels' baseline register. "Hawk," Silas said to one of them, "what's the word from Route 9? The man called Hawk, lean, weathered face, a scar on his chin that had probably had a story at some point and was now just geography, said, "Lenny's got a truck sitting about a mile up, engine off, no plates." Silas processed that without visible reaction. "How long?" "About 40 minutes. Same time your girl's visitors were leaving." Marin made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. Callum looked at her. She was doing the same math he was. The SUV leaving the diner lot and the no-plate truck arriving on Route 9 within the same window, which meant the 2 men hadn't left because of her warning about who was coming. They'd left because someone had radioed them to pull back and let the second element move into position. They hadn't been scared off. They'd been repositioned. "They're watching the road out," Decker said. "Both roads," Hawk said. "Lenny says there's a second vehicle on the 18 junction. One mountain road in, one mountain road out, and both of them now had watchers parked on them in the dark and the mist." Silas looked at the alley, at the rain-slicked walls and the dumpster and the red neon bleeding through the puddles. His jaw worked once. Then he said, "Garage." They moved. What followed was 20 minutes of organized, quiet movement through Pinewood's back streets. Not running, not rushing, the specific unhurried pace of men who knew that running drew attention and that attention was the thing they could not afford. Callum stayed close to Marin, not because anyone told him to, but because the alternative was being somewhere he didn't understand in the company of people he didn't know. And Marin was at least the person whose situation he'd already decided to be part of. She glanced at him once as they moved. "You doing okay?" "Ribs are angry," he said. "Everything else is fine." "Your ribs should be angrier." "Probably." The garage was 3 blocks off Main, a commercial space that the Steel Angels had apparently secured within the first hour of arriving in town. The rolling door was up, and the inside was lit by 2 portable work lights casting hard white illumination across concrete floor, and 3 bikes parked inside, and approximately 15 men arranged around the perimeter in the particular configuration of people who are guarding a space without making it obvious that's what they're doing. The rolling door came down behind them with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. It was warmer inside. Not warm. The garage held the cold the way concrete does, radiating it from the floor up, but warmer than the alley. Someone had a camp stove in the corner with a tin coffee pot on it, and the smell of cheap coffee cut through the oil and rubber smell of the space. Callum's body moved toward it before his brain registered the impulse. A man he hadn't met yet handed him a tin cup without being asked. Callum looked at him. The man was 50s, heavy-set, with a gray beard and the kind of eyes that had looked at a lot of bad situations and made peace with what they saw. "Drink it," the man said. "You look like you're about to go gray." Callum drank it. It tasted like an argument. Silas had the duffel bag on a workbench and Decker was beside him, and they were talking in the low, concentrated murmur of men planning, and Marin stood slightly apart from them with her arms crossed, listening, but not yet joining. Callum watched her. He was developing the specific literacy of her body language that you develop for people you've spent an intense night in proximity to. The way she held her shoulders when she was thinking versus when she was deciding. The way her jaw set when she was about to say something she'd rather not. She was about to say something she'd rather not. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said, loud enough to cut through the planning conversation. Every head in the garage turned. Silas looked up from the workbench. Marin unfolded her arms. "The contact list. Third name, Whitford. That's not the important one." Decker went still. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been looking at that document structure since Callum opened the drive. The dates? The initials on the subfolders." She looked at her father. "Marcus organized it by handler. Each subfolder is a different person on Blackwell's payroll. The one that goes 6 levels deep, the one with the most transactions, the most documentation." She stopped. "Marin," Silas said, "the initials on that folder are TH." She held his gaze. "Dad, who in the Steel Angels has those initials?" The garage went so quiet Callum could hear the rain on the metal roof. A sound like static. A sound like the world receiving a signal it wasn't prepared for. Silas's face had become a wall. "Say it plain." "Thomas Holt," Marin said. "Treasurer, Steel Angels, 22 years, your oldest friend." She said it the way you say something that you've been carrying so long it's made grooves in you, not with anger, with the exhaustion of the truth that has finally gotten too heavy to hold. "Marcus didn't just find evidence against Blackwell, Dad. He found evidence that someone inside the club has been feeding Blackwell information for at least 3 years. Routes, schedules, club business, contacts." She paused. The rain on the roof, the camp stove popping. "The location of every safe house we've ever used." Nobody moved. "The motel in Eugene," Decker said, very carefully. "On the list," Marin said. "The gas station in Salem." "On the list." Decker turned away from the group and put both hands flat on the garage wall and stood like that for a moment, his back to the room, his shoulders working with something he wasn't going to let anyone see. Callum looked at Silas. The man's face was... it was nothing. That was the word for it. The thing Callum had seen earlier, the hairline fracture of the father finding his daughter still breathing, was gone. And what was underneath it was the face of a man who had built something across 40 years and is now looking at the structural crack that means the whole weight has been sitting wrong the whole time. "Where is Holt?" Silas said. His voice was completely flat. "Hawk from the corner. He rode in with the main group. He's outside on the street with the north perimeter." Silas looked at Decker's back. Decker straightened up, turned around. His face had done the same thing Silas's had done, gone somewhere sealed. "I'll get him." "Quietly," Silas said. "Obviously." Decker went out the side door. The garage breathed. Callum stood holding his tin cup of terrible coffee and felt the temperature of the room change the way temperature changes before lightning. Not cooler, but denser, the air thickening with something that needed to discharge. Marin was looking at her father. "Dad?" "Don't," he said. "I'm not going to say I'm sorry." "I know you're not. Don't say anything." He turned back to the workbench and the evidence. He opened the contact list subfolder, the one with TH at the head of it, and looked at the transaction records. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. Callum watched his face and understood that this was what it looked like when a man discovered that 22 years of trust had been a door left open for the enemy, and that understanding made him feel something private and complicated. because he knew what it was to find out that the people who were supposed to be solid weren't. He just hadn't known it at this scale. The side door opened. Decker came back in with two other men, and between them, not being dragged, not restrained, walking under his own power but with the specific quality of a man who knows the walk is over, was Thomas Holt. Callum had not seen Holt before this moment. He was stocky and in his mid-60s, with white hair cut short and a face that had spent decades doing the particular work of appearing trustworthy. Not handsome. Solid. The kind of face that said, "I will not let you down," with every line of it. The Steel Angel's treasurer patch on his cut. 22 years of patches beneath it. He looked at Silas, and his face did something that Callum watched very carefully and would think about for a long time afterward. It did not do guilt. It did not do fear. It did something worse. It did the expression of a man who had known this moment was coming and had decided somewhere along the way that he could live with it when it arrived. "Silas," he said. "Tommy." Silas's voice was the quietest it had been all night. "Tell me I'm wrong." A pause that lasted 3 seconds and contained everything. "You're not wrong," Holt said. The room absorbed it. Callum felt it land in every man there. The particular bodily shock of a truth that you intellectually prepared for and are still not ready for when it arrives. Decker's hands closed into fists and opened again. Hawk turned away. The heavy-set man with the gray beard said something very quiet in a language Callum didn't recognize. Silas put both hands on the workbench and leaned on it. He did not look at Holt for a long moment. "How long?" he said. 3 years. "How much?" "Silas." "How?" "Much." Still that flat, quiet voice. The voice that had no room for anything except the facts. Holt's jaw worked. "Enough." He said it with something that might have been shame or might have been exhaustion, and Callum was not sure there was a meaningful difference. "My brother's medical. You know what happened with the business. I know what happened with the business," Silas said. "I offered to help." "I know you did." "I offered 3 times." "I know." Something in Holt's voice cracked, just a hairline fracture, just enough to show the person underneath the decision. "I couldn't take it, not from you, not after everything. I couldn't be the man who took charity from his president. So instead you became the man who sold us to the person trying to destroy us." Silas straightened up. He turned and looked at Holt, and what was in his face was not anger. Callum had been expecting anger and was wrong. What was there was something much older and much heavier. Grief, maybe. The kind that doesn't announce itself. Holt met his eyes. "I didn't know he was going to move on Marin. I swear to you, Silas, whatever Blackwell told me he was after, it wasn't your daughter. When you found out, Silas said, 3 days ago, when I heard what happened to Marcus." Something shifted in Holt's face. "I didn't know he was going to touch Marcus." "But you knew Marcus was looking," Decker said from the side. His voice had a different quality than Silas's. Less sealed, more like a blade that needed somewhere to go. "You knew Marcus was building evidence, and you reported that to Blackwell." Holt said nothing. "Which means," Decker continued, stepping closer, "that Marcus Velez went over that guardrail on Route 18 because you told Blackwell he was a problem." "I didn't know." "Did you report that Marcus was building evidence? Yes or no?" The garage was a held breath. The rain on the roof. The camp stove ticking. "Yes," Holt said. Decker's hand moved. Silas said his name, just his name, one word, nothing else, and Decker stopped. He stood very still for a moment, the effort of stopping visible in every line of him. Then he turned and walked to the far wall of the garage and stood with his back to the room. Callum understood that he was watching the Steel Angels face something that had no clean resolution. These were men built on loyalty. Loyalty was the structure that everything else in their lives hung from. And loyalty had been used as a weapon against them from the inside, which was the kind of wound that didn't cauterize. Holt hadn't broken the law the way Blackwell broke the law, for profit and power and the cold engineering of corruption. He'd broken it from exhaustion and pride, and the specific human failing of not being able to ask for help from the person most willing to give it. That didn't make Marcus Velez any less dead. Silas looked at Holt for a long time. Then, the trucks on Route 9 and the 18 junction. Blackwell's people, did you know they were coming tonight? No. Fast, certain. I haven't communicated with Blackwell since I heard about Marcus. I shut it down. I threw the phone. He looked at Marin. If I'd known they were going to move on you, but they had your information, Marin said. They had everything you gave them. They didn't need you to make a call tonight. You'd already given them the map. She said it without heat, which was worse than heat. She said it like a person stating the load-bearing math of a collapse. The safe houses, the routes, the contacts, they had all of it from you. They just had to use it. Holt's face did something complicated and collapsed. He put one hand over his mouth. He was 63 years old and standing in a garage with the consequences of a decision that had made complete sense at the time and made no sense now, the way decisions always work, the way the road looks different when you turn around. What do you want me to do? He said. To Silas, not to the room, just to Silas. 22 years of talking to one man. Silas picked up his coffee cup from the workbench. He looked at it. He set it back down. Right now I want you to sit down and not say anything else, he said. We'll deal with this when the other thing is dealt with. Hawk and another man moved Holt to the corner, not roughly, and he sat on an overturned crate with his hands between his knees and his face aimed at the floor, and the room reorganized itself around his presence the way a body reorganizes around a wound, making accommodations for something that hadn't been there before. Callum had watched all of it and was now sitting on the floor with his back against a workbench because his ribs had stopped accepting standing as a reasonable proposition. He became aware, with the slow peripheral awareness of exhaustion, that Marin had come to sit on the floor beside him. Not close, a foot of space between them, but beside him, which felt significant in a way he didn't examine. You okay? He said. No. She said it immediately, which was different from all the times she'd controlled her answers. Thomas Holt taught me to change a tire. He's been at every Steel Angels anniversary since I was 4 years old. He used to bring me saltwater taffy from the coast because it was my favorite, and my dad could never remember. She was looking at her hands. He knew about Marcus. He knew what Marcus was doing, and he reported it, and Marcus is dead. Callum didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. My father is never going to recover from this, she continued. Not from Holt. You can recover from an enemy. You can't recover from... She stopped. You just keep carrying it. Yeah, Callum said. She looked at him sideways. You know something about that. He thought about his father. The particular kind of absence that leaves a person shaped wrong in ways they don't discover until they try to fit into spaces that expect a different shape. A little, he said. She looked back at her hands, the rain on the roof, the camp stove, then Decker's voice from across the garage, controlled and urgent. Silas. Something in the tone moved everyone in the room. Callum got to his feet, the ribs objecting fiercely, and Marin was already up beside him, because that tone was the tone of news arriving when you thought you'd already received all the news there was. Decker had his phone to his ear. He was listening to someone, and his face was doing the sealed, careful thing it did when the information was bad and needed to be processed before it could be delivered. He lowered the phone, looked at Silas. That's Lenny. The truck on Route 9 just moved. Toward us, Silas said. No. Decker's jaw worked once. Toward Pinewood General. The room didn't understand that for a half second. Then it did. Callum understood it first because he was 17, and it was the thing that happened in the kind of story he'd never thought he was part of, and the specific cold that hit him in the chest was so complete that his ribs actually stopped hurting for a moment. They're not coming after the bag, he said. Decker looked at him. Whitford already knows what's on the drive, Callum said. Holt's 3 years of intelligence. They know Marcus documented everything. They know the bag exists. But if the bag is already in our hands and they can't intercept it... He stopped, heard his own voice working through it, running ahead of him. If they can't intercept it, the next logical move is to eliminate the chain of custody. Make the evidence inadmissible. Make the witness... He stopped. Silas was already moving toward the rolling door. Callum grabbed the workbench. The chain of custody. The witness. The person who opened the drive and read the names aloud in a room full of people. The person who had no connection to the Steel Angels and no record and no reason to be part of this. The person who was therefore the single most credible voice in any proceeding that might follow. Except that he wasn't at the garage. He was... Where had Callum last seen Pete Danforth? Asleep in his booth at Rosie's, which was 3 blocks away on Main Street, which was where the graveyard shift ran until 5 a.m., and a heavy-set cook named Grover had probably already decided that nothing in his job description covered tonight and was standing by the fryer praying for 6 a.m. Not Pete. Not Grover. The garage door rolled up, cold air and mist and the red-black of a mountain town at 3:30 in the morning. "The diner," Callum said. "Grover said he was going to call my mother." Silas turned. "She works at the lumberyard office," Callum said. "Double shifts. If Grover called her and she answered, and Whitford has a tap on Grover's line..." He heard how it sounded. He heard the gap in the logic. But the cold in his chest was not theoretical. It was the specific cold of a person who has just understood how they are being used and how the people who matter to them can be reached. Marin looked at her father. "If Blackwell's people found Callum's mother before we..." "North Unit," Silas said to Hawk, without waiting for Marin to finish the sentence. "The lumberyard on the west edge. Go." He looked at Callum. "Address." Callum gave him his home address. The house his mother had lived in for 11 years. The house with the bad porch step and the neighbor's dog that barked at 6 a.m., and the smell of cedar that had soaked into the walls from his mother's work clothes. And he said it to a man he'd known for less than 2 hours while standing in a garage full of bikers at 3:30 in the morning, and the coordinates of his entire life up to this point felt very small and very fragile in a way they never had before. Hawk was gone. 2 bikes started outside, the sound of Harley engines in the wet dark. Silas looked at Callum. Something in his expression had changed again. Not the grief of Holt's betrayal, not the careful assessment of the first hour. Something else. Something that Callum couldn't fully read because he didn't have the vocabulary for it yet, but that felt distantly and surprisingly like being seen. "She'll be all right," Silas said, and something in the way he said it was not comfort. It was closer to a promise, which was different, which required something from the person making it. Callum nodded. His throat was doing something inconvenient. Decker was at the workbench, the evidence spread out before him, working through the subfolder structure with the focused attention of a man building a case out of what he found. "Silas, the audio files in the TH folder. These are recordings of calls." "Between Holt and Blackwell," Silas said. "Between Holt and Blackwell and..." Decker stopped. He put his hand over the laptop speaker. He looked up. His face was the blankest Callum had seen it. "And Detective Whitford. The 3 of them. Planning Marcus's accident." He paused. "There are 11 calls. The last one was 48 hours before Marcus went over the guardrail. The garage. Thomas Holt on his overturned crate with his face aimed at the floor. Heard that sentence, and something happened in his body that was visible from across the room. A sort of settling, the physical response of a man who has been carrying a specific weight and has now heard it named out loud and has nothing left to pretend about. "Tommy," Silas said, very quietly. Across the garage, the voice of 40 years of mornings. "You knew exactly what they were going to do to him." Holt's hands between his knees tightened until the knuckles went white. He did not look up. "Tommy." "Yes," Holt said. His voice had almost nothing left in it. "I knew." Silas stood very still, the rain on the roof. A Harley somewhere on the outer perimeter making a slow circuit. The camp stove. When Silas moved, it was not toward Holt. It was toward the door. He stood in the opening of the garage looking out at the wet, dark street, and he said nothing for a long moment, and the set of his shoulders was the most human thing Callum had seen from him, the old grief and the old anger, and the weight of what loyalty costs when it's real, and what it costs even more when it isn't. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something moved through his face. He answered it, listened for 15 seconds, said nothing in return, ended the call. He turned around. His eyes found Callum. "That was Hawk," he said. "Your mother is fine. She's safe." He paused. "Callum, Pinewood General is 4 minutes from here." Callum looked at him. There was already someone at the hospital when Hawk's unit reached the street. Not moving toward your house, toward the hospital. Silas held his gaze. Someone was admitted 45 minutes ago, a male, 17, found on Route 9 half a mile from the diner. He stopped. "They're saying hit and run." Callum's mind ran back through the night. The diner, Marin, Pete Danforth asleep in his booth, the two men leaving, the SUV lights disappearing up Route 9, who had been on Route 9 45 minutes ago, who had been walking home in the mist on the mountain road that was the only way in and the only way out. He looked at Silas. "There's a kid," he said. "Jesse Carver. He busses tables on the late shift at the pizza place on Main. He walks home. He always walks because his truck is broken and his dad won't—" He stopped. "Jesse Carver," Silas said. "He's 15, Callum said." The word 15 landed in the garage and remade the room. Marin made a sound. Decker turned away from the workbench. Even the men at the perimeter who had been still as furniture shifted, something moving through the group the way wind moves through a field, visible not in any single point, but in the whole pattern changing at once. Silas looked at Callum, and in his face was the absolute clarity of a man who has just understood what kind of enemy he is dealing with. Not corruption as transaction, not crime as business, but the kind of cruelty that hits a 15-year-old on a mountain road in the rain because it needs to send a message, because the message it sends is we will reach anything you care about, and we will do it without hesitation. And the only question is how much you want to cost yourself before you stop. "We go to the hospital," Silas said. "We can't," Decker said. "If Whitford has people there." "We go," Silas said. One word, no inflection, the kind of certainty that ends arguments before they finish forming. Decker closed the laptop. He looked at Holt in the corner, then at the two men nearest to him. "You two, stay with him. He doesn't leave this garage. He doesn't make any calls." He looked at Holt directly for the first time since the confession. "Tommy, you want to undo any piece of what you've done? You stay put, you stay quiet, and when this is over, you tell everything you know to every person who needs to hear it. That's the only road you have left." Holt raised his eyes. They were red-rimmed and old, and carrying something that was going to weigh him for whatever time he had left. "All right," he said. Decker picked up the duffel bag. He looked at Callum. "You ride." "I don't have a bike." "You ride with me." Outside, the Harleys were starting, one by one and then together, the sound filling the wet street, reverberating off the storefronts of Pinewood's empty main, rolling up against the mountain and coming back changed. Callum stepped out of the garage into the mist and the cold and the smell of exhaust and wet asphalt and looked at the line of bikes beginning to organize themselves with the same unhurried structural precision as everything else the Steel Angels did. He thought about Jesse Carver, walking home in the dark with his broken truck bad luck and his 15 years of being a kid in a small town who hadn't done anything to anyone. He thought about Marcus Velez taking a curve too fast on a road he'd driven for 15 years. He thought about Grover and his spatula and Pete Danforth asleep in his booth and the bell above the diner door chiming for a man who walked in like the whole world owed him something. He climbed on behind Decker, grabbed the back bar of the seat. The bike moved under him, a different sensation than he'd expected, less vibration and more intention. The machine organized around a single purpose. The way the men riding them were organized around a single purpose, and Callum felt something shift in him that he would not be able to name for a long time, some pivot point in the architecture of who he was or who he'd been until tonight. The road to Pinewood General was 4 minutes. In 4 minutes, they would find out how far Blackwell's reach went inside those hospital walls. In 4 minutes, Callum Wren, invisible boy, dishwasher, 17, nobody, would walk into a building that held a 15-year-old he barely knew and a detective who wanted him silent in a system that had been bought and paid for. And he would have to decide what kind of person he was going to be on the other side of all of this, because the version that stayed out of the way was gone, and the version that replaced it didn't have a name yet, and the road was already moving beneath him. The Steel Angels rode through Pinewood in the rain, and somewhere in Pinewood General Hospital, behind clean white walls and fluorescent lights and the sanitized hum of machines, something was waiting that would make everything that had happened tonight look like the beginning of the story rather than the story itself. Pinewood General was a small hospital doing the work of a larger one, the way everything in a mountain town did. Understaffed, overextended, the building itself a mid-70s concrete block that had been added to and patched and added to again until it looked like a structure that had survived several different ideas about what it was supposed to be. 2 floors, an ER entrance on the south side with a canopy that leaked at both ends, a parking lot that held maybe 60 cars and now held, as the Steel Angels pulled in, considerably more motorcycles than the administration had planned for when they painted the lines. Callum felt the bike stop under him and got off, and his legs almost didn't catch him. Decker grabbed his arm without looking, the instinctive catch of a man who'd been in enough situations to develop peripheral awareness of people about to go down, and Callum steadied himself and breathed through it. "Ribs," Decker said. "I know. You need to get those looked at. After." Decker looked at him for a half-second, nodded. "Let go." The entrance was lit hard under the canopy, fluorescent white bleeding out into the mist, and there were 2 men standing near the ER doors who were not hospital staff. Callum clocked them the same moment Silas did. The way they stood, the specific positioning that was slightly too aware of the parking lot, one of them with a hand resting near his jacket pocket in the practiced, unconscious way of a man who'd been trained to keep a hand near something. Silas stopped walking. The men behind him stopped. The 2 men at the entrance looked at the assembled Steel Angels, looked at the sheer number of them, the organized patience of 200 men who had ridden through cold and rain and were now standing in a hospital parking lot with the particular stillness of people who had already decided what they were willing to do. And something in their body language changed. Not fear, not exactly. The recalculation of men who had been deployed with a specific operational picture and are now looking at a situation that is not that picture. Silas walked forward alone. Callum watched him cover the distance between the group and the entrance with the same unhurried stride he'd used to walk into Rosie's diner, and there was something in that stride that was the most clarifying thing Callum had witnessed all night. The absolute economy of a man who had nothing to prove and therefore nothing to perform. He stopped in front of the taller of the 2 men. Close. Not aggressive. Just close. "We're here to see a patient," Silas said. "Jesse Carver, 15 years old, brought in 45 minutes ago." The taller man looked past him at the parking lot, back at Silas. "Visiting hours are not the conversation we're having," Silas said. Same flat, patient voice. "I'm going to go inside and I'm going to find out what's happening with that boy, and I'm going to make sure the people in this building who are here to help him can do their jobs. That's all I'm here for." He paused. "I need you to make a decision about whether you're going to be in my way when I do that." A silence. The mist. The fluorescent hum. The taller man stepped aside. Silas walked through the ER doors. Callum went in behind him with Decker and Marine and Hawk and 3 others, and the rest stayed outside. And the distribution felt correct. Enough inside to be present and enough outside to be known. The Steel Angels as both a fact and a warning, operating simultaneously on 2 registers the way things only can when they've had 40 years of practice. The ER waiting room was the particular purgatory of small-town emergency medicine at 4 in the morning. 2 families spread across plastic chairs, a man with his hand wrapped in a shop rag, the specific fluorescent pallor that makes everyone look like a different version of themselves. A nurse at the reception desk looked up at the group coming through the door, and her hand moved toward her phone. Silas put both hands flat on the counter. "Jesse Carver," he said. "He was brought in. Are you family?" "I'm here on behalf of his family. His mother is being contacted." He held the nurse's eyes. Not threatening, steady. "Is he alive?" The nurse looked at him. Something in her face decided something. "He's in trauma too. He's stable." She said it quickly, like getting out from under a weight. "He's stable, okay? He's going to be all right. Broken arm, head laceration, some bruising. She glanced at the door to the treatment area. He was conscious when they brought him in. Callum's lungs released something they'd been holding. The officer, Decker said. He was looking at the waiting room. A man in a Pinewood Sheriff's Department uniform was sitting in the far corner, coffee cup in hand, watching them with the particular alert stillness of someone who had been waiting and is now recalibrating why he was waiting. Is that officer here in connection with the Carver admission? The nurse looked at the deputy, back at Decker. He arrived about 10 minutes after the ambulance. Decker looked at Silas. Silas looked at the deputy. The deputy stood up. He was young, mid-20s, with the kind of face that hadn't decided what kind of cop it was going to be yet, still in the range of possibilities. He was not Whitford. He was something else. A deputy sent to observe and report, Callum read, not to act. The deputy crossed the room. He looked at Silas and then at the group and then at Silas again. Sir, I need to ask, is Detective Whitford aware you're here tonight? Silas said. The deputy's face did the thing faces do when a question lands closer to the truth than the person asking it should have been able to get. Detective Whitford oversees yes or no? Yes. He's aware of the admission. Did he ask you to come? A pause. He asked me to keep him informed. Silas looked at the deputy for a long moment. The waiting room, the plastic chairs, the man with the wrapped hand staring at all of them. How long have you been on the job, son? The deputy's jaw shifted. 8 months. 8 months? Silas nodded slowly. Long enough to know what you signed up for. Short enough that not everything is decided yet. He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, not a sudden movement, and produced a business card. Held it out. The people I represent are in possession of evidence of serious crimes, including the death of a man named Marcus Velez and the assault of a 15-year-old boy tonight. That evidence names specific individuals in a corruption network that includes members of local law enforcement. He paused. I'm telling you this because you're standing in a hospital at 4 a.m, reporting to a man whose name is on that list, and I think you deserve to know what you're standing in before you decide how to stand in it. The deputy looked at the card. He didn't take it yet. What's your name? Silas said. Reyes, the deputy said. Danny Reyes. Deputy Reyes, take the card. Think about what I said. Whatever Whitford asks you next. Yep. Take 10 seconds before you answer. Silas held the card steady. That's all I'm asking. Reyes took the card. Silas turned back to the group. He looked at Callum. Something moved in his face. A decision being made and confirmed. Marin, the drive. Marin had the duffel bag. She unzipped it and removed the waterproof case and the hard drive sealed inside it, and she held it for a moment. Just a moment. The weight of everything it had cost to keep it safe for 4 days visible in the way her hands held it. And then she handed it to her father. Silas looked at the drive. He looked at Callum. You read the contact list. You can identify what's on this. Yes, Callum said. If we get this to the right people, federal level, above Whitford's reach, your testimony about what you read and when you read it and who was present becomes the chain of custody. He held the drive. That makes you a material witness in a federal investigation. You understand what that means. It means Blackwell's people have a reason to come at me directly, Callum said. Yes. Instead of through Jesse Carver and my mother. Yes. Callum thought about that. He thought about it for approximately 3 seconds, which was less than the amount of time the decision probably deserved and exactly the amount of time it actually needed. Okay, he said. Silas looked at him for a moment with that quality of attention that Callum had started to understand was the man's version of speaking. Then he handed the drive to Decker. Get it to Harmon, tonight. Don't stop. Don't call ahead from a traceable phone. Don't tell anyone outside this room where you're going. Decker took the drive. He looked at it. He looked at Silas with the 40 years of shared language that had somehow survived this night intact. When this is done, he said. When this is done, Silas said, go. Decker went. Hawk went with him. The side door, out to the bikes, the sound of 2 Harleys starting and moving east, away from Route 9 and the 18 junction, taking the logging road that added 40 minutes to the trip, but kept them off every road that Blackwell's people were watching. Callum heard the engines recede into the wet dark, and then they were gone, and the evidence was gone with them, and the room felt lighter and more dangerous at the same time. Then Callum's phone rang. He had forgotten he had a phone. That felt like information about the night he'd been having. He pulled it out. The screen said Grover. And he answered it, and Grover's voice came through with the particular quality of a man who has been pushed past the boundary of his professional obligations and is operating on pure human alarm. "Callum, there's a man here." Everything in Callum went flat and still. "At the diner. He came in 10 minutes ago, showed a badge, detective something. He's asking about you, about what happened tonight." Whitford. "Grover." Callum kept his voice even. "Listen to me. Don't tell him anything. Tell him you can't talk without a lawyer present." "Callum, I'm a cook. I don't have a—" "Tell him anyway. And Grover, but get Pete Danforth out of there. If Pete's still there, get him out the back the way I showed Marin. Go to the church hall 2 streets over and wait." He paused. "Do not go home. Do you understand me?" A silence. Then, with the resignation of a man who came to work at 11 p.m. and is now in a story he didn't audition for, "I understand you." "I'm sorry, Grover." "Buy me a new spatula," Grover said, and hung up. Silas had been listening. He looked at Marin. "Whitford's at the diner." "He's covering his bases," Marin said. "The bag's gone. Decker and Hawk are on the logging road. He can't intercept the evidence now, so he's going after witnesses." She looked at Callum. "He's going to come here next." "Then we need to be ready when he does," Silas said. He pulled out his own phone. He made a call. 2 rings, then, "It's Hartley. I need you in Pinewood, Oregon. Tonight." A pause. "I know what time it is, Nadia. I need a federal contact. I need them on record by 6 a.m., and I need someone who can receive evidence from a courier without it going through any local law enforcement in this county." Another pause, longer. His face during the pause was the face of a man cashing in something significant. "Yes, that kind. Thank you." He ended the call. He looked at the group. "We have until 6 a.m. "That's less than 2 hours," Marin said. "I know." "And Whitford could walk through that door in 20 minutes. "I know, Marin." She looked at her father. He looked at her. And something passed between them in that look that had nothing to do with the immediate tactical situation and everything to do with the years before it. The years of Marin running from the life he'd built, and Silas building it anyway, and neither of them able to explain to the other why the thing they'd made together had become the thing that separated them. "I'm going to go check on Jesse," Marin said. "They won't let you in." "I'm not going to ask." She turned and walked toward the treatment area doors. Silas watched her go. Something in his face that Callum had no business seeing and saw anyway. The specific, helpless grief of a parent watching a child become someone they didn't raise and couldn't have. The grief that is really a kind of pride that hasn't found its language yet. Callum moved to a chair along the wall and sat down because his body was submitting a formal complaint about the entire evening. His ribs were a constant low fire. His hands had developed a faint tremor that he recognized as adrenaline debt. The body presenting the bill for the night's expenditures. He pressed both palms flat on his thighs and breathed through it, counting breaths the way he'd read about somewhere, the way you manage the parts of yourself that are running faster than you need them to. Silas sat in the chair beside him, not beside him in the way of sitting next to a stranger, beside him in the way of deliberate proximity, the way a person sits when they mean to be sitting there. "How are you holding up?" Silas said. "I'll let you know when I figure it out," Callum said. Something that was almost a sound moved through Silas's face. Not quite a laugh. Something that had started as one and been interrupted by the weight of the night and settled into something quieter. "The way you handled yourself tonight," Silas said. He was looking at the middle distance. "What you did in the diner, what you've done since." A pause. "Most grown men don't do that." "I didn't know what I was doing," Callum said. "I still don't." "That's not true." Silas looked at him directly. "Not knowing the full picture isn't the same as not knowing what you're doing. You knew what those men were going to do to Marin, and you stood in the way." He paused. That's not instinct. That's character. Callum looked at the floor. He wasn't built for this kind of conversation. He'd spent 17 years being invisible, and invisible people don't develop a lot of infrastructure for being seen. My daughter is alive tonight, Silas said. The evidence Marcus died to protect is on its way to people who can use it. That's because of you. He looked at his hands, big hands, scarred at the knuckles, a road rash scar on the left one that had gone silver with age. I owe you something I don't know how to pay. You don't owe me anything, Callum said. I do. Flat. Certain. And I pay my debts. Before Callum could answer that, the ER doors opened. Detective Carl Whitford was 54, built like a man who had been athletic once and had let it calcify into bulk, with a face that wore authority the way certain men wear it. Not earned, but assumed. The authority of a person who has never had to account for it. He was in civilian clothes, but his badge was on his belt, and his posture was the posture of a man who expected rooms to organize around him. He stopped when he saw the waiting room, saw the steel angels, saw Silas. Something moved through his face, a recalculation. But he covered it fast. Callum watched him cover it with the practiced facility of a man who had been in rooms where his face showed too much and had trained himself out of it. He walked toward Silas. Silas stood up. Mr. Hartley, Whitford said, I wasn't expecting to find you here. Detective, Silas said. Funny. I was expecting to find you. A silence. The two men, 4 feet apart, the specific geometry of men who know exactly what the other one knows and are determining how to arrange themselves around that knowledge. There was an incident tonight, Whitford said. A miner was injured on Route 9. I'm here to follow up. At 4 in the morning, Silas said. I take my job seriously. I know you do. Silas's voice had not changed, not 1 degree warmer or cooler. What kind of vehicle was it? The one that hit Jesse Carver? Whitford looked at him. We don't have that information yet. Because you haven't looked, Silas said, or because you already know. The air in the waiting room thickened. Deputy Reyes, still in the corner, had gone very still. The families in their plastic chairs were not looking at this exchange and were paying complete attention to it. I need to ask you some questions about your presence in Pinewood tonight, Whitford said. You and several hundred affiliated individuals descending on a small town at 2 in the morning. We came for my daughter, Silas said. She was threatened. We responded. He paused. That's what family does. I'd like to speak with your daughter. She's with a patient. I'd like to speak with her now. She's with a patient, Silas said again. Identical intonation, identical finality. When she's done, I'll let her know you'd like a conversation. She'll decide whether to have it. Whitford's jaw worked once. His eyes moved to Callum. Recognition, assessment, the mental filing of a man cataloging a problem. And you, he said. You're the Wren kid. From the diner. Yes, Callum said. He stood up. It cost him. He stood straight anyway. I need a statement from you about the incident tonight. What incident? Callum said. Whitford looked at him. The altercation at Rosie's diner. 2 men came in. They left. Callum met his eyes. I didn't catch their plates. Whitford's expression did not change. That was the tell. The absence of a normal response to a normal answer. The flatness of a man who already knows what happened and is collecting information about how much the other person is willing to say. The bag, Whitford said. The girl was carrying a bag. She had luggage, Callum said. Lots of people travel with luggage. Callum. Whitford's voice dropped, went to something that was not quite friendly, but was performing friendliness the way a surface performs depth. I know you've been through a rough night. I know there are a lot of people here who seem very... He gestured at the steel angels, the leather, the assembled weight of the room. Convincing. But whatever story you've been told about what's in that bag and who I am, you are a minor, and you are in over your head, and the right thing for you right now is to tell me where the evidence is before this gets to a place that's very difficult for everyone. Callum looked at him. He thought about Marcus Velez on Route 18. He thought about Jesse Carver's broken arm. He thought about 11 phone calls between 3 men planning a death, and the last one made 48 hours before the guardrail. I don't know what evidence you're referring to, Callum said. Whitford stared at him. The performance of patience fell away, and what was underneath it was the flat, cold anger of a man who has run out of angles and knows it, and is deciding what to do about that. Last chance, Whitford said. Quiet, pointed. Detective Whitford. A new voice. From the treatment area doors. Marin walked out. She was carrying her phone, screen facing forward, and she held it up so Whitford could see the active call display. This is Nadia Voss from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Portland Field Office. She's been listening to this conversation for the last 4 minutes. She would like to speak with you. She held the phone out. Whitford looked at the phone. He looked at Marin. He looked at Silas. He looked at Deputy Danny Reyes in the corner, who was holding the business card and had not called anyone. He looked at the room, all of it, the assembled steel angels and the waiting families and the nurse behind the counter who had stopped pretending to do paperwork, and the 17-year-old kid with broken ribs who had started a chain of events in a diner 4 hours ago by standing between a girl and something wrong. He looked at the phone one more time, and then, with the particular movement of a man making a decision that he knows he can't take back, he reached under his jacket. Everything happened at the same instant. Silas moved, not fast, controlled, the specific controlled speed of a man who is trained for exactly this, and put himself between Whitford and the room. Hawk moved from the left. The two steel angels by the door were already closing the distance. Deputy Reyes had his own hand moving, his face white, 8 months on the job, and this the thing it had been leading to. Whitford's hand came out from under his jacket with his own phone. He put it to his ear. The room held its breath for exactly 1 second. "This is Whitford," he said into the phone. His voice was perfectly steady. The voice of a man who has been in bad rooms and knows that the only thing that matters now is what the next 60 seconds look like. "I need legal counsel. Do not say anything further to anyone until I—" Marin lowered her phone. On the screen, the call timer was still running. She looked at her father. Silas looked at Whitford. He looked at him the way you look at something that has revealed its final shape. "Deputy Reyes," Silas said, without looking away from Whitford. "I think Detective Whitford needs some company while he waits for his lawyer." Reyes looked at the business card. He looked at Whitford. He was 26 years old and 8 months into a job and standing at the exact junction where you find out who you are when the decision actually costs something. He crossed the room and stood beside Whitford. "Sir," he said, "I'd like you to come sit down." Whitford looked at him. Something in his face, surprise maybe, the surprise of a man who assumed he knew which way all the pieces would fall. The ER door opened. A woman came in fast. Scrubs, no jacket, the specific expression of hospital staff who have heard something they didn't like and are going to address it. And behind her, 2 more steel angels from the parking lot who had apparently decided the geometry of the room required reinforcement. Marin looked at the phone in her hand, at the call still running. She put it back to her ear. "Miss Voss," she said. Her voice was the steadiest it had been since she walked into Rosie's diner. "We need you in Pinewood, tonight. Specifically, we need you at Pinewood General Hospital on the corner of Main and 4th, and we need you to hear what a deputy named Danny Reyes has to say about the last 8 months. She paused. "He's going to tell you the truth. I think he's been wanting to tell someone for a while." She lowered the phone. The ER waiting room of Pinewood General held the tableau for a long, charged moment. Whitford standing with his phone to his ear and his future reorganizing itself around what had just happened. Reyes standing beside him with the business card still in his hand, Silas in the center of the room with his arms at his sides, and his face the flattest it had been all night, and Callum Wren against the wall, broken ribs and steady hands, watching the world he'd stepped into finish taking its shape. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't know. "Drive delivered. Contact confirmed. 6 a.m. He looked at Silas, showed him the screen. Silas read it, looked at Callum, and for the first time all night, something that was unambiguously a smile moved through the older man's face, brief, controlled, like everything else about him, but real. Then Silas's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face went somewhere Callum hadn't seen it go, something private and braced. He answered it, listened for 7 seconds. When he lowered the phone, his eyes found Marin. "Blackwell knows," he said. He's moving." He looked at the doors. At the parking lot beyond them, 200 bikes in the mist. "He's not coming for the evidence. The evidence is gone, and he knows it." He looked at his daughter, and in his face was something that had nothing to do with strategy or position or 40 years of leading men through bad nights. It was the look of a father who has understood in the last second of the last minute where the real attack is coming from. "He's going for the sawmill," Silas said. "The old Halverson property. He wants a meet." His voice. "Marin, he wants you there." And Marin looked at her father, and Callum looked at both of them, and the ER doors were behind them, and the parking lot was beyond that, and somewhere on the mountain above Pinewood, an abandoned sawmill was waiting in the dark, and the rain with whatever Desmond Blackwell had decided was his final move, and the question of whether the Steel Angels would arrive there in time, and what they would find when they did, was the only question left, and it was hanging in the air of the waiting room like a thing with weight, and the answer was already in motion before anyone said a word, because in the parking lot, 200 Harley engines were turning over in the rain, one by one, and then together, the sound rising through the walls of Pinewood General like a tide coming in, like a decision that had already been made finding its voice at last. The Halverson sawmill had been dead for 11 years. You could tell by the way the rain hit it, not the clean percussion of rain on a maintained roof, but the irregular drip and collapse of water finding every fault in a structure that had stopped fighting gravity long ago. The main building was a cathedral of rotted timber and rusted saw machinery, the roof open in 3 places to the October sky, the floor a geography of puddles and sawdust turned to paste, and the particular silence of a place that used to be loud and had forgotten how. Blackwell had chosen it the way men like him chose things. For the isolation, for the absence of witnesses, for the way the mountain road leading to it was single lane and easily controlled. What he had not accounted for, or had perhaps miscalculated in the specific way that men who have never been truly opposed miscalculate things, was what 200 organized men on motorcycles could do to a single-lane mountain road when they arrived from 3 directions simultaneously. The Steel Angels had ridden without lights for the last quarter mile. Callum felt it in his sternum, the absence of engine sound more present than the sound itself had been. 200 men cutting throttle in unison and coasting the last stretch on momentum and gravity, and the particular discipline of people who have learned that silence is a weapon. He was still behind Silas, who had taken him on his own bike when Decker left with the evidence, and he held the back bar and breathed through the ribs and watched the sawmill materialize out of the mist and the dark like something that had always been there waiting. Blackwell had 4 men with him. That was the first thing Callum saw when the Steel Angels spread out across the mill yard and the headlights came on all at once, flooding the space with the flat white light of 60 beams. 4 men, armed, positioned around a 5th figure who stood in the center of the yard with the stillness of a man who had decided that what he was about to do was necessary and had made peace with that. Desmond Blackwell was 60, lean, in a rain jacket that cost more than Callum's mother made in a week. He had the face of a man who gave speeches, composed, certain, the specific blankness of someone who had learned to perform confidence so long it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. He looked at the assembled Steel Angels the way you look at weather. As an inconvenience you intended to outlast. Silas got off the bike. Callum got off behind him. Marin stepped forward. Blackwell looked at her. "You should have kept running," he said. "I tried that," Marin said. "It didn't work." "The evidence." He said it like a hand laid on a table. "Whatever you think you've sent to whoever you think you've sent it to, you should understand that I have been managing situations like this for 20 years. Documents disappear. Witnesses reconsider. The machinery of these things moves slowly, and I am very comfortable in slow-moving machinery." "The drive is with the FBI," Marin said. "Field office received it 40 minutes ago. Chain of custody is documented. Callum Wren is the primary witness for content identification." She said it cleanly, without theater. "It's done, Mr. Blackwell. There's nothing left to threaten." Something moved through Blackwell's face, the first real thing Callum had seen there. "The boy," he said, and looked at Callum with the specific cold attention of a man identifying a structural problem. "You put a dishwasher at the center of this." "He put himself there," Marin said. Blackwell was quiet for a moment. The rain on the ruined roof. Somewhere in the machinery of the old mill, water dripping through steel onto steel, a hollow, regular sound like a clock. Then one of his men moved. It happened fast, and it happened badly. The man going for Marin, not for a weapon, but with his hands, the particular decision of someone following an order given before tonight that had not been rescinded. Silas was already moving. Two steel angels from the perimeter converged. There was a sound of impact and a sound of boots on wet gravel and 30 seconds of controlled, brutal physics. And when it resolved, Blackwell's 4 men were on the ground in various configurations of unwillingness to continue, and Silas was standing in the center of the yard with blood on his knuckles and his breathing elevated for the first time all night. He looked at Blackwell. Blackwell had not moved. "That was the last option you had," Silas said. He was breathing harder than he'd been. He looked at his hands, at the blood, at the man in front of him who had paid for Marcus Velez's death, and Jesse Carver's broken arm and 4 days of his daughter running alone through Oregon with a bag she couldn't open. He took 2 steps toward Blackwell and stopped. Marin put her hand on his arm, not restraining, just there. The weight of her hand on his arm, and he stopped, and he looked at her, and she looked at him, and something passed between them that was the whole of the night and the whole of what it had cost, and the whole of what it meant that they were standing here together instead of apart. "Not like this," she said, quietly, for him only. Silas looked at Blackwell for a long moment. The rain and the ruined roof and the flat white light of 60 headlights. Then he stepped back. "Call it in," he said, to no one in particular and to everyone. Marin was already on the phone. Deputy Danny Reyes had made his choice in the waiting room of Pinewood General, and the result of that choice was a direct line to the FBI field contact who was already in a car heading north on I-5. And the conversation Marin was having was brief and certain, and when she ended it, she looked at Blackwell with the expression of a person who has carried something very heavy for a very long time and has finally set it down. 20 minutes, she said. Blackwell looked at the assembled steel angels, at the yard, at the mountain road behind them, single lane and controlled, the same road he'd chosen for its isolation, now closed in every direction by men on motorcycles. He looked at Silas. "You won't walk away from this clean," Blackwell said. "Whatever you think you've built with this testimony, they'll look at the steel angels next. They always do." "Let them look," Silas said. "I've got nothing that doesn't hold up to looking." Blackwell said nothing after that. They waited 20 minutes in the rain. The federal agents arrived in 3 vehicles, moving fast up the mountain road, and what followed was procedural and quiet and entirely without drama. The specific anticlimax of justice arriving in the form of paperwork and official language and hands in cuffs. The architecture of accountability, which is never as satisfying as the stories make it, and is the only thing that actually works. Callum watched it from the edge of the mill yard with his back against a timber post and his ribs at full complaint and his hands in his jacket pockets. Marin came and stood beside him. They watched Blackwell get into a federal vehicle. They watched the door close. They watched the vehicle move down the mountain road and disappear. "Is it enough?" Callum said. "The audio files alone," Marin said. 11 calls. Whitford, Holt, Blackwell, planning Marcus's death. The transaction records going back 9 years, the contract evidence. She paused. "It's enough." Callum nodded. He looked at the sky above the ruined roof, the specific gray of an Oregon dawn assembling itself at the edges, the darkness thinning to something almost blue. "Marcus would have wanted to see it," he said. He hadn't known Marcus Velez. He'd known him for approximately 3 hours as a name and a dead man's phone and a set of subfolder initials, but the statement felt true anyway. "Yeah," Marin said. "He would have." They stood in the gray dawn and the rain that was becoming lighter by degrees and didn't say anything else, and that felt correct too. Dawn found Rosie's diner exactly as it had been left. Cracked vinyl booths, flickering fluorescent above the register. The jukebox that hadn't worked in 3 years standing in its corner like a monument to something. The sign was still on. The coffee was still on. Grover was behind the counter with a new spatula he had apparently located from somewhere in the kitchen, and his expression when the door opened and Callum walked in was the expression of a man who made a decision sometime around 4 in the morning to feel nothing further about this night and was succeeding moderately. "You're alive," Grover said. "Yeah," Callum said. "Your ribs." "Hospital after this." Grover looked at the people coming in behind Callum. Silas, Marin, Hawk, 3 others. He looked at them the way you look at an event that has exceeded its original scope. Then he turned and started pulling mugs off the shelf. Pete Danforth was already in his booth. Callum didn't know how he'd gotten back from the church hall or how long he'd been sitting there, but he was in his regular spot with his regular posture and an empty coffee cup. And when Callum sat across from him, he looked up with the expression of a man who has rearranged his understanding of the world sometime in the last several hours and is still taking inventory. "You all right, Pete?" Callum said. Pete looked at him. "I came in for decaf," he said. "I know." "Tuesday." "I know." Pete looked at the booth across from them, where Silas had sat down and Marin had sat across from him, and they were talking in the low, careful way of people rebuilding something that had never been properly built to begin with. Not loud, not easy. The specific work of 2 people who love each other and have been failing to say it in any language the other one could receive. Pete looked at them, and then looked at Callum, and something in the old man's face was not confusion anymore. "Who are these people?" Pete said. Callum thought about that, about what the right answer was, about all the things the Steel Angels were and weren't that he'd spent a night learning to distinguish. "Family," he said. "Sort of. The kind you don't choose." Pete nodded slowly, the nod of a man who knew something about that variety of family. "Okay," he said. Grover set coffee in front of both of them. The mug was hot, and the coffee was the same coffee it always was, too dark, slightly burnt, absolutely what the moment required. And Callum wrapped both hands around it and let the warmth come up through his palms, and thought about nothing in particular for a full minute, which was the first full minute of nothing he'd had since 11:47 the night before. Silas came and sat across from him, Marin beside her father. The booth was too small for 4 people, but they made it work. "How are the ribs?" Silas said. "Asking me that won't change what they are," Callum said. "Fair." Silas wrapped his hands around his own mug. He looked around the diner set, the cracked vinyl, the broken jukebox, the fluorescent above the register doing its 40-second flicker with its sick heartbeat regularity. Something in his face was quieter than it had been all night. The particular quiet of a man who has come through something and is still taking stock of what came through with him. "Thomas Holt will cooperate with investigators," Silas said. "He'll give them everything, the full 3 years." He paused. "It won't bring Marcus back." "No," Callum said. "It'll mean something to his wife, his kids." He drank his coffee. "That's what it has to mean." Callum nodded. Marin was looking at the window. The dawn coming in gray and clean off the mountain, the mist beginning to lift off Route 9. The town of Pinewood, assembling itself for an ordinary Thursday morning that had no idea what the night before it had contained. A logging truck went past on the highway. Someone's dog on the opposite sidewalk stopped and looked at the row of motorcycles parked along the curb and then kept walking. "I'm going to stay," Marin said, still looking at the window. "In Pinewood," she paused. "For a while. I want to study law. There are programs. I've been looking at them for a year, but I kept moving, so I kept not applying." Silas looked at his daughter. He didn't say anything for a moment. "You'd be good at that," he said. His voice was the quietest it had been all night, the voice of a man who has found the right language on the last try. "I know," she said, and then quieter. "I'm not running anymore, Dad." He put his hand over hers on the table. Big hand, road-scarred, the left one with the old silver scar. Just that. Just the weight of it. Callum looked away because that moment was not his. He looked at the window, at the motorcycles along the curb, the row of them stretching half a block, rain-slicked and chrome-bright in the early light. 200 men who had ridden down a mountain in the dark for one girl, who had stood in a hospital waiting room at 4 in the morning and held their ground without crossing it, who had delivered a 15-year-old boy's unconscious form to an ER and waited in the cold to know he was breathing. He thought about what Silas had said. Dangerous, but not the kind of danger you run from, the kind that runs toward. His phone buzzed. A text from a number that was now saved in his contacts under Hawk. Kid at the hospital's awake, arm set, asking for his mom. Thought you'd want to know. Callum read it twice, set the phone down, picked up his coffee. The fluorescent above the register flickered. 40 seconds? Same as always. The jukebox stood in its corner. Grover refilled everyone's mugs without being asked and went back behind the counter and turned on the radio, low. Something from 30 years ago with a steel guitar and a voice that knew things, and the diner filled with it gently, the way a room fills with morning. Not all at once, but in the corners first, and then the middle, and then everywhere. At 7 a.m., Silas stood up. He looked at Callum across the table. Come outside, he said. Callum came outside. The air was cold and clean, and the mist had burned off the lower road, Route 9 stretching north and south and empty in both directions, in the way mountain roads are empty at dawn before the day finds them. The motorcycles were lined up along the curb. The steel angels were mounted and waiting with the organized patience that was apparently just how they existed in the world, and the sight of them in the early light was different from the sight of them at 2 in the morning. Less like a thunderhead and more like something that had always been there, elemental, the landscape rearranging itself around their presence rather than the other way around. Silas stood on the sidewalk in front of Rosie's diner and looked at Callum. I'm going to send someone to fix your car, he said. Callum blinked. My car isn't the Civic with the cracked block on the east side of the lot, Silas said. I saw it when we came in. Someone's going to fix it. He paused. And when you graduate, there will be something waiting for you if you want it. Not the club, not any obligation, just options. People who can open doors. Your choice what you do with it. Callum looked at him. Why? Silas looked at him for a moment with that full, quiet attention. Because my daughter is alive, he said, and that's because you stood up in a diner with a dish rag. He looked at the road. Not every debt can be paid. This one can. He held out his hand. Callum shook it, the hand that had built something across 40 years and held it together through a night that should have broken it. The hand that had covered his daughters on a diner table in the first gray light of an ordinary Thursday morning. Silas got on his bike. One by one, and then together, 200 engines turned over in the cold morning air of Pinewood, Oregon. The sound filling the street, rolling up against the storefronts, climbing toward the mountain, and coming back changed, the way all sounds change when they've been somewhere and returned. It lasted 30 seconds. Then the lead bike moved north on Route 9, and the formation followed, and the sound began to diminish the way thunder diminishes, not all at once, but in waves, fading into the mountain and the trees and the distance until it was something you felt more than heard, and then until it was nothing at all. Callum stood on the sidewalk in front of Rosie's diner and listened to the silence after. Marin came out and stood beside him. She had her canvas jacket on, the collar still turned up, the black duffel bag gone. She stood with her hands in her pockets and her face turned toward the empty road where the bikes had been. They're gone, Callum said. They come back, she said. That's what they do. The fluorescent in the diner window flickered behind them. The coffee smell came through the glass, warm and burnt, and completely itself. Somewhere down Main Street, a storefront sign came on. Hardware store. Opening early. The ordinary machinery of Thursday morning beginning its rotations. Callum looked at the empty road. He thought, I was invisible. He thought, I am not anymore. He went back inside and picked up his dish rag and refilled Pete Danforth's coffee, and the bell above the door chimed once, clear and small, the way it had been chiming for 30 years, and Pinewood, Oregon let Thursday morning in.